Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all to another session of Spear India COVID-19 Academy. And today we have a panel discussion with us, which is on the topic NGO programming in the context of COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic has greatly impacted the ongoing and the future programming by all the CSOs and other stakeholders towards national and global development, DRR, and climate goals. So it is also going to have a significant impact on resources available for CSOs programming. In this panel discussion, the leaders from civil society organization will discuss these challenges and also explore strategies for adaptation, innovation, and solution at organization and collective level. To deliver the session, we have a very eminent list of panelists with us. So I would like to take this opportunity to introduce my first panelist for the discussion. It's Mr. N.M. Prishti, who is Chief Mentor cum Director of CDMAS. He has over 35 years of experience in country as well as overseas positions of importance in government, non-government, social development, disaster management, and corporate organization. With engineering and management as educational background and several multidisciplinary training in India and abroad, as part of select global team of eminent persons in the area of disaster management, involved in making of the Spear standards for disaster management. He is also founder chairperson of Spear India. Welcome, sir, to this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have another panel. Yes, sir. We have another panelist who is Mr. Matthew Cherin, who is CEO HelpAge India. He has been the CEO of HelpAge India for the last 16 years and serves on the board of international bodies, Guide Star International, HelpAge International. He is also a member of the Global Future Council of World Economic Forum, foremost interdisciplinary knowledge network for promoting innovative thinking to shape a sustainable and inclusive future. I welcome you, sir, to this panel discussion. We have with us Mr. Jayant Kumar, who is head of program CASA. He is presently also the chairperson of Credibility Alliance. He has been the chairperson of WANI earlier and served as member in various committees of government like Panchayati Raj, GeoNGO Task Force of NDMA. He also took part in conducting studies globally on development issues worldwide and has more than 35 years of experience in working in development sector. Welcome, sir, to this panel discussion. We have Mr. Sudarshan Suchi, who is CEO of SOS Children Villages of India. He has over 30 years of experience in conceptualizing, scoping, and articulation of development programs, project planning, and execution. Also public advocacy, establishing partnership, collaboration, coalition, efficient resource mobilization, and utilization. I welcome you, sir, to this discussion. We have Neelam ma'am with us, who is Country Director and CEO, Childford India. Masters in Business Administration from London University. She has been serving as Child Funds India Country Director and CEO for 6 years, providing dynamic and strategic leadership. Prior to this, she was also working with a global organization based in UK, which is the Resource Alliance. Welcome, ma'am, to this session. We have Ms. Prema Gopalan, who is founder and executive director of SSCP, which is Swam Siksha Priyo, a learning and a developing organization that has empowered over 180,000 rural women as entrepreneurs, farmers, and community leaders. I welcome ma'am to the session. Really looking forward to hear. We have Mrs. Jayanti Shukla, who is CEO United Way Mumbai, has been in United Way Mumbai since 2008. Prior to this, she was with New India Assurance Company, a multinational insurance company, as a regional manager in the company Delhi Regional Office. Welcome, ma'am. And with this, we have the moderator of today's panel discussion is Mr. Vikrant Mahajan, who is CEO Spear India. He has 24 years of professional experience working at the interagency policy level and frontline humanitarian action with government, UN, corporation, CSOs, and armed forces in diverse contexts. He is also currently as CEO of Spear India. I welcome everyone in today's panel discussion. And with this, Vikrant, I would like to hand it over to you to take forward the discussion.
Thank you so much, Navila, and a very warm welcome to all of you, for all the panelists as well as the participants. Today we have a very interesting discussion. As Nivila shared, it's about the NGO programming. We're looking at that how the many organizations are having a long-term ongoing impact in terms of our ERR targets, climate targets, going to have an impact on our long-term planning and programs. Equally impacted are seems to be the resource and the resource planning for that, as we see the COVID has a big impact on the economy, and many of the profit-making industries are going to be impacted by it. Which means in time to come in future, and also the retail fundings is going to have and see that the programs, maybe there's a need for more coordination discussed today. Just to get onto the discussion, I think is to begin with it. Maybe my first question I would like to address to Mr. Jayant, who comes from a long career, long work experience in the development programming and also the disaster management now with the organization CASA. So, Mr. Jayant, how has COVID impacted the existing NGO programs of CASA? What are some of the adaptation, and innovations you're trying at your end to do some COVID-sensitive programming? Over to you, Mr. Jayant. Jayant, sir, you have to unmute yourself.
Now, can you hear me, Vikrant? Yes. Yeah. So, good afternoon, everybody. And Vikrant, it is a real pleasure to have this opportunity to share our experiences with regards to COVID with all the panelists as well as the participants, those who are there. You know, COVID is a surprise, and it is a surprise of a kind of which has thrown everything at all levels out of gear, and that is what has also happened with a large number of large or almost all voluntary organizations. I mean, our experience has been very challenging. That the being a large organization and working throughout the country in about 22 states, plus a large number of partners and direct intervention. So we being involved both in direct implementation and also with the through the partner organizations, the smaller NGOs, and have been given a defined agreed pre-agreed program. All that had came to an abrupt stop. That was even the communication was very difficult, and because of the lockdown, we had problems in communicating, I mean, to our office, because transferring our funds, etc., was a problem. So there was a total disruption, not only at our level, Delhi office level, but our zonal office, sector offices, as well as also at the community level, our partners and all. So there was a total lack of communication. So that was one biggest challenge. But that was a practical thing, but the biggest challenge came in terms of our realization that what we have been doing has to stop completely, and we have to start doing something else. So in other words, we have to say that there was a total change, a significant, if not total change, I would rather say, but a significant change in the program environment context, even in the operating environment of the partner NGOs and within the organization. So it had a very significant impact that you have to sort of stop completely, in which you were going full stream and at all India level, and then have a pause and to reorganize, rework on this whole thing. So the another challenge which we faced was total change in the context of the program. I mean, you are working with mass organizations, and suddenly you can't have large gatherings of people. You are working with people's organization, you can't have a large gathering. You are working on certain issue, that issue nobody is talking about. The issue of the COVID becomes the most relevant issue. So it was a very drastic change in the sense that we had to immediately address in that case. Our engagement strategy with the community change. As I said, we have to work with the mass organizations and mass leadership building. You have to now rethink. So the strategy to engage also completely became, for the short time at least, it has become not useful. So you have to think about it, all the things. And the resource issue also came up very significantly, because you had certain resources for a certain kind of program, and that resource was not usable for an emergency situation, you know, this thing. So, and for the emergency situation, you had to communicate, and at all other levels, the disruption was very high. So the resource issue became very important. On the one hand, you have some resources, but you cannot use it. On the other hand, you are trying to communicate with the partners, the other stakeholders, you are not able to get an affirmative or any guidelines from them. So that simultaneously, the pressure from community also increased a lot because of the loss of employment, etc., and also from the partner organizations, because their staff also, the mobility was completely here, and there was an immediate pressure on the resources available within the village communities, and the demand for immediate response was very. So we were caught between two things: whether we, how do we divert the resources to meet the immediate needs of the people, those resources which were meant for a long-term program. So that was the elderly, disabled, and the women and children were greatly affected. And so these were the challenges which we faced. And what we did was, I will very briefly talk about the alternatives which we developed. Was that our first priority was to restore the communication, because even in Delhi we were not able to meet each other. So in Delhi it was possible, but how do you reach the last man who's working in Mizoram or Meghalaya, somewhere in a remote area where communication is also a big problem? So we worked on the issue of that, and with the help. So first of all, we regathered ourselves, and we sort of reestablished communication with the use of technologies and all these things. So that's one thing. Another important thing which we did was that we relied heavily on our partnerships. We have been over a period of time working with a large number of civil society organizations all over the country. We had networks and platforms and all that. So we used those networks. We totally decentralized operations at that particular level, and also because we also work directly, we had developed a lot of community institutions and local leadership, and we found that the use of local leadership, the localization process was very, very helpful, in the sense that you had local leadership, you had the local institutions in the people's organization format, you had local people's networks there, and their relationship with the panchayat and engagement with the panchayat was found very helpful, though that aspect needs to be further strengthened, especially the panchayat area, which we can talk about later. And we encouraged the communities and gave them total decentralization, released them, provided them whatever they required for, and had a discussion of the plan, a broad planner of action, and gave them total flexibility to work on the issue and respond to the COVID-19 situation arising, along with the guidance and support of some of the elderly partners and around. So a small advisory group locally helping them and communicating with us, and everything was absolutely decentralized, totally up to the grassroots level, up to the village level, and total flexibility, so you can change. In the meantime, we also negotiated with the donors, and you see, the donors, as all of us know, they have a very strict mandate. Like if they are a humanitarian aid provider, they will stick to humanitarian aid criteria and all these things. If you are a long-term aid a long-term development partner, then they have a long-term goal, objectives, indicators, etc. All of you go through that. You have to meet all that thing, and that has to be. So it was a difficult negotiation, but it went on with, it was difficult because there also at the other side also with the donors there was disruption. So there was a very a quick interaction, fortunately, and we were able to convince for the first time in our 72, 70 plus years of history, where the development program funding was reorganized and reoriented towards the immediate COVID response. So that was also a very difficult negotiation, but given the context globally, and yeah, it was we were able to negotiate with the donors. So decentralization and localization was the focus. So our mandate was to enable them to get resources possible and timely resources, and let them do the planning, etc. in a broader framework on which we have. Yeah. We then had to also look into the programs and how do we use the, so we developed a standard operating procedure for the village leaders and CASA staff, those who are locally placed at the community level and which they had mobility, and enabled them to how to now from a shift from a mass mobilization strategy, shifting to small groups and program diversification, the approach in terms of awareness, in terms of wash, in terms of health and hygiene. So this was a shift because health and hygiene was not our priority work with the community. So this shift also had to be taken. So we developed a standard operating procedure which was circulated to all the community leaders and our staff and the partner organizations. And we promoted smaller actions and all, and there was also, as a very strategically, in the sense that very consciously promoted a very strong interaction with the panchayat. So without the panchayat collaboration, we at the community level, at the grassroots level, we engaged them to the maximum possible extent, and we also provided our centers wherever we had as a quarantine center. So that was an additional thing to do that, and the interaction with the government officials, especially the district office, the district collector, and the all departments together. So there was a free information flow, clear that what is CASA doing, and all information was very fast. Communication was there and shared with locally. We made a point that all the local stakeholders should get information constantly about what work is going on here in this particular year.
Thank you so much.
We are in the process of now reviewing the total action plan of the organization. We are in the process of, we have a practice of developing a 10-year action plan. Now we have already crossed 3 years of that particular action plan. Now we have come to a conclusion that we will need to look into this. So we will be further looking into our larger organizational plans, etc. We have found networks and strategic partners very useful in this whole process, because you had a great amount of faith and trust already established with these organizations and individuals, and that is what helped in terms of very quick and swift decentralization, and already our reach and our presence at the community level made it very fast to respond, and at different locations in one time, so together simultaneously. Use of technology also came into handy because we have to adopt, and because communication was a problem. So largely still it was handy. Many of us were not very familiar with many of these traditional mindset, but that now has gone to the grassroots level. Our local communities also, in the sense our community leaders as well as our local staff members, are also connected through mobile phones and all these things. So, I mean, not only particularly in terms of calling, but also through meetings and connections like Zooms and all these things. So a regular communication also goes on to that year. I think I will, others also have to speak. So This is the I have spoken from a larger organizational perspective, because we have to respond at our own organization level, at a large number of partners, networks, and CBOs level, and at the community level where we work directly and through partners. So it's a larger perspective I have taken, but I can come later on this smaller point. Thanks, Vikrant. Thank you very much.
Yes, I think that was very comprehensive, very elaboratively. I think you dealt with all the aspects of the programming, the current challenges, and the solution. The organization like CASA, I think the wide outreach across the country is taking on. I'll move the same question probably to Mr. Sudarshan. Maybe they work like as a SOS Children's Village, have a different model of a programming altogether. So, Mr. Sudarshan, how is it possible SOS Children's Village? You know, what were some of the challenges, perhaps something which Jayant has not covered? If you would like to share that.
So,
over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to be very brief and specific. Implementing organization, the biggest concern is business as usual. So even in unusual times, the biggest challenge is how do you continue what your committed engagements are, children under the roof. So I think in the COVID circumstances, that became the biggest challenge. How do you ensure continuity of what is the basic expectation of all children under our roof? Rations, securing that, preventive health and hygiene conditions, doing that, and putting kind of systems and processes in place. This is something very basic, but however, in the unusual times, a classic NGO, I'm generalizing, I'm taking the liberty to generalize. Maybe we are the exception. Most of us come from a school of thought of directly being there. Technology or no technology, 21st century, but most of us come from, if you are not on the ground, if you're not connected with each other, and the way of doing things is frozen. There's a particular, let's say, I would, say romantic way, but there's a belief that direct action means physically, mentally, in every way you are present. And I think the biggest challenge of COVID was graduating or trying to struggle with the remote doing. It's not a question of not having a laptop or not having connectivity or technology designed by itself coming in the way. I think the mindset of, doing things despite not being somewhere or not going from somewhere to somewhere. Even in a children's village, the team present there was captive within their respective rooms. And it was unthinkable that the children could not come out as usual to play, and that within a home they had to wash their hands 10 times a day or wear a mask. So I think doing business as usual in that unusual time was the most difficult thing. The second most difficult thing, for those of you who have been brought up in Delhi old times, the DTC bus. DTC buses had a tradition of never stopping at a bus stop. They came running, moving gently, and kept moving faster on a stop. And you had to get on and off it while it was moving. Your whole timing had to be there. If you want to get somewhere in a DTC bus, that was the art. So I look at our implementing organizations, situation, something similar. Things keep happening. Just because some situation has arisen doesn't mean that everything will wait for you. The bus just does not come to halt at the stand. You've just got to cope up. Today, tomorrow, day after. On the flip side, on the positive side, most of us are so seasoned with, the antenna standing up to prepare for anything anticipated. Probably we do excesses in that. So my team got together first sometime very early in March, even before lockdowns happened, when these things were just being talked about, that let's quickly get 2 months rations secure in every location so that the supply of food and then basic hygiene requirements do not become an issue. I was not sure how sound this thing was, because just the sheer volume of things and capacity. So I would say, operationalizing such things came very handy. it was like, everything got mobilized without, I mean, there were a lot of discussions around, but happenings were much more than discussions. It was like one of those classical North Indian, again, girls' house wedding. Everybody got down to doing something quickly. Somebody secured the campus, somebody connected the doctors, somebody arranged the rations and all, and somebody else started figuring out online classes, this, that. Not to say the least, having children, potential of infinitely being locked into the house. What came in handy were the ludos, the caroms, and the storytelling abilities, and suddenly delegating elder children to take care of the younger children. So I think plenty of innovations started happening in the process, or revivals in terms of way of doing things, getting back to basics. On the whole, I would say the situation, the entire pandemic, it actually it served a notice of getting us back on our toes. Perhaps just when we were in a comfort zone of business as usual, shall continue business as usual, it brought everything to a standstill the way we were used to doing things. So everything has come to question that way. On a red flag side, fundraising has gone into absolute uncertain terms. Uncertain people with uncertain quantities, uncertain commitment, and an uncertain a few months ahead of how it will pan out. On one side, donors actually not being most enthusiastic. On other side, I suspect expenses may climb rather than be contained, because absolutely the kind of requirements that are happening due to being in a prisoner like of the circumstance situation. So on the good side for the same thing is that we are learning to tighten our belts, reduce expenses, cut corners everywhere. Things that are on top of my head, which I wanted to also share with all of you. I think we'll soon, all of us will have to wonder about, like it or not, that how do we increasingly stay committed to processes which tend to decentralize things, which tend to decontrol, which make local communities more resilient and taking charge of their own decision making. And then I think while most of us are going gung-ho about technology, I would say it's time to be a little circumspect. That just before we entered COVID time, there was this whole thing about speed, scale, spread, everything happening from technology in a way. I mean, big is beautiful was the principle that was being followed. COVID has brought further the relevance of technology that it's needed as of yesterday. But I think change on ground is not driven by technology, and it won't be. So I feel we should not suddenly get over enthusiastic about technology being able to resolve everything and anything. It won't be. All it's doing is keeping us connected while we are at a distance. And the rest of it, I think time will tell as to how things evolve. At SOS, I think the moment this distancing and lockout happened, we matured, we aged a few years, or rather we came of age, because suddenly we realized that despite physical presence, average employees' engagement with other employees, teams engagement together, or being the togetherness idea, I think if it was on a scale of 10, if it was 2, 3, when everything was going fine, I think it is 7, 8 when we are all at a distance. So quite a lot of us in personal and official life are far more connected today than we were ever before. And probably most of the people, my colleagues, are logging in far more hours than they would do when they were at office. So this is my initial observations. More to come, Vikrant, as we go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sudarshan sir. I think was really helpful. And we see the SOS as completely a different model also. So good to understand, the challenges and issues within the children's villages and the house and how to engage children, among other things. We have Mr. Prusti, you also have experience with working with a wide array of actors. So I think from your perspective, maybe a bit, something which not covered by Jayant or Mr. Sudarshan about the NGO programming. But if you can also share a bit that how you are seeing that it's impacting the global goals on beyond development, DRR, climate. Over to you, Mr. Prusti.
Thank you, Vikrant. It is very interesting initiative, and I have been attending few of these COVID Academy sessions, and I'm overly pleased, and I wish to express thanks to the organizers. Jayant and Sudarshan had made very good and appropriate points. Let me give some varieties. Fortunately or incidentally, I am associated with multiple organizations and variety type of organization, like humanitarian organization, advisory organization, eye care organization, coalitions, and government partnerships and all that. So various types. I'll give you some quick snapshots of these organizations, how COVID has impacted their functioning and their growth and their strategy and plan and actions. Let me start with one organization, Vision Spring. I am the chair of the Vision Spring, which is an eye care NGO. And eye care, they do screening, and then after the screening, they make people access a pair of glasses, and it's targeted for the poor community. And they have 3 domains: C to on, that means your livelihood intervention; C to learn, that is your education, school children, and kind of intervention; and C to be safe, that all that you do, that you should be safe, because without your clear vision, safety is many times threatened. So that organization, obviously, the screening is the first part, which is a directly human interface. So when COVID came, the organization was challenged. It was appearing that probably the organization had to close down. But then we did a quick analysis of that. What is the strength of the organization? In the entire value chain of our working, we analyzed, and we found that supply chain is one of our strong points, because we handle 1 million pair of glasses any given point of time, and we do global sourcing, and we reach out to hundreds, thousands of locations, thousands of community locations, etc. Then we, in COVID response, how we can leverage on our capability or capacity on supply chain management. Then we say that to get into a different work, we have to talk to our donors. So then we quickly worked with the donors. It all happened in the month of March. And fortunately, 90% of our donors, they agreed to the proposition which Jayant was mentioning, that agreed to the proposition to divert, not full, if not full. Some donors, they agreed to divert the full, but some donors, they said that you divert X percentage of the resource towards COVID response. And we decided that we'll go for large scale procurement of basic needs, and we supported hospitals, supported government-run hospital, private-run hospital, health setups, NGOs with various kinds of requirements. So that kept the organizations running. And then we have been maintaining a supply chain center in Noida. So that supply chain center came back to life. And then this is one example. Then another example, we'll see that we work with another organization where we do humanitarian intervention on ground. There we used to respond to the natural disaster. Then we quickly decided that we will consider this pandemic as a disaster of high impact, and we will do many things in connection with this COVID response. So we started looking at the migrants. We started looking at the refugee community. We started looking at the poorer community who is as distress, making distress call from different parts of the country. We opened a call center for receiving distress call, and we started extending help, and through direct food and non-food help. And then we started working on the innovations. Then among the innovations, we start looking at that what can happen. The organization that immediately we have to see that organization people are not able to come to the office. They are at different places. When the lockdown started, some people went back to their home and they are not able to come back to Delhi or come back to our office and all that. So we decided that we will have zero attendance in office. Today we work as an organization without anybody coming to office, 100% digital action, and everybody is connected on the internet and telephone and Zoom, Skype, and all kinds of things. And then this process was started, but still we found that there is you have to look at your cost indexes, because the manpower cost, your project management cost, all these things. So we completely reworked your budget. And day before yesterday, we were having a board meeting, and we found that we could reduce the overhead by almost, we can reduce the cost by 50%. And then what can be the unavoidable cost, and what are the kind of costs that we will have to reduce, what cost we can make zero, and what cost will go up. There are certain costs which are also going up. So we found that on an average in this current year's business plan, we'll be able to make a 50% cut in the cost. We suspended all our growth plans, investments, and all that, and we notified our donors, and donors stood by us. And this is the beginning to make a difference. The this next innovation we did, that there has to be some cut in the salary. So we said that we'll start with the CEO, and CEO made an announcement that will be 30% cut. Then the top management people will go for 20% cut, 25% cut, and all that. And we made a policy decision that at the base of the organization structure, the cut in the salary will be either zero or will be nominal. That kind of process, and we followed it, and we found that we will be able to survive. Not only survive, we will be able to grow in the coming 2 years. Then next innovation we brought is the use of technology. We found that this technology, generally people think that it is smartphone is the technology. There are technology beyond smartphone, and fortunately as an organization we had looked at technology as an enabler in our interventions in all the organizations I am associated, and we started working vigorously on the disruptive technology that can come and all that. We are using the IoTs, then we are using artificial intelligence, we are using the unmanned aerial vehicles, all kinds of things we are beginning using and experimenting on different methodology and how we can do. We thought that probably people will be very unsupportive of the trials. So, but in the COVID situation, the COVID situation, we found tremendous amount of acceptance to this disruptive ideas. Even can you think of a government wanting to do pilot trials, proof of concept? We found that governments are willing to come forward. The governments worked with us, and we tried use of this technology in 3-4 interventions, and we were able to demonstrate that yes, it can happen. Then we were now able to also negotiate, discuss with the government of India and all that. The technology is becoming now a policy and is becoming an enabler and all that kind of thing. So these are some of the things that could happen by a proactive planning and strategizing. Now, I think Vikrant said that I should connect it to the SDGs and the SFDRR and all this kind of global framework, where on that perspective, let me touch upon a few things. That the gains of development in terms of poverty reduction, hunger-free, or reducing hunger, and improving the health status, all this, whatever we have done, gained through decades, have not only been lost, it has also gone to negative. So the situation is now a completely different scenario. So SDG is going to be now rewritten in my opinion, and especially the Sustainable Development Goal is making, although making much more relevance to this COVID circumstances, but the indicator, the strategies, the framework is definitely being challenged today to undergo major modification. And at the government, at the India level, at national level, or the state level, the SDGs now need to be looked at afresh and all that. On the climate front, and we are talking about this global warming 3.2 degree rise in temperature is beginning to demonstrate havoc. We saw cyclone after cyclone, and the monsoon is approaching, and how it is going to behave is going to be anybody's guess. We are definitely waiting to survive through some of the severe floods and cloudbursts and whatnot that will happen. And climate change also had predicted that there will be new kind of virus. And who knows, there is no scientific evidence as yet, and no studies have yet revealed. But definitely the climate change researchers, they have predicted that there will be new kind of virus, new kind of health pandemic will with the world will witness. And we are seeing this COVID, and whether COVID is a culmination of the climate change impact or our excessive exploitation of the nature, or that our future, our researchers will tell over a period of time. But it is certain that the situation is becoming tough and critical. The decarbonization process is it need now much more vigorous attention. You think that people say that people are locked at home and not required to go to the office, so there will be less vehicle use and there will be less pollution. But you look at the road, it is not. Because of the social distancing, the public transportation system, the underutilized transport system, or inefficient use of public transport system, so the number of vehicular traffic has gone up. The density of vehicular traffic has gone up. The pollution is going up. So all this, the COVID is throwing away all kinds of norms and rules, and this the situation is becoming extra critical. And the strict pollution control norms or the emission control norms are also getting now. Unfortunately, because of this critical environment, the regulatory framework is also becoming weak, and the emission control guidelines and all that is being grossly violated, and our emissions are going up and pollutions are going up. And I don't think that unless we become very conscious, we'll be able to face a better society for tomorrow. On the disaster front, compound disaster has begun experiencing.
Hello.
We used to say that within one disaster, another disaster takes place. We have seen take example of Sundarbans. It was suffering from the COVID impact. Then it is a migration hotspot. So the migrants came. So the community spread has begun in that area. And then the Amphan cyclone came, and the complete livelihood is completely destroyed. And on the top of it, that is the area which is also a malnutrition hotspot. So it was already passing through a silent emergency. On the top of it, COVID came. On the top of it, the migration pressure came. On the top of it, Amphan came. So this is a classic example of how the situation can push the community to an extreme vulnerable situation, and the support available in that particular affected area in West Bengal is so minimal that it is pitiable. So having said that, I'll some good things to talk about that what we should, as an NGO, what we can do, and how we should get ready to get adjusted to the new normal. We thought many NGOs, they thought that this is a matter of time, a few months, and after August, after September, after October, by December, we'll go back to business as usual. But I think it is, let me make a forewarn to all my NGO brothers and sisters that this new normal is going to stay. We are not going to go back to our business as usual even for the next couple of years. So unless we reorganize ourselves, reorganize our strategies, reorganize our thinking, we will not be able to survive. NGOs will be threatened for their existence. So therefore, it is necessary that we must come up to the mark by getting ourselves reorganized. The resource is one aspect of it, but resources is getting scarce day by day, more scarce, and I think we have some points we'll be talking about the resource subsequently. But resource, besides the resource being critical, there are other issues like human capacity. So how the organizational safety that is to be. We have to make our organizational COVID prepared, COVID ready. The WHO has got guidelines how the organizational readiness guidelines. I think we must disseminate that kind of guidelines to all our NGO fraternity, and they should get ready. And is this the infection safe? How our staff can be infection safe? There are certain protocol. How our people must know it and practice it. Then only we'll be able to go and work in the on ground. So these two things are very much important for our organization to learn quickly and adapt it and take it to the community and all that. So that the rapid adaptability is a requirement. This is a time, it is showing up that this is a good time to collaborate and work. Alone we cannot do things. And we have pursued this concept of collaboration and networking. And this is a time.
Proceed on this collaboration thing. I may come back later on.
Okay. Okay, I have got few more points, then I'll stop this.
But I'll come back to Suji maybe. Yeah, on the collaboration bit and other things. I think we're also looking at the time here, and I think I'd like to move to our next speaker.
I have got a couple of, give me 1-2 minutes. I'll just complete my another. Yeah. So this we have to look at working with the government and business is becoming very important. Then appetite for innovations and disruptive ideas are becoming huge, and we must use that kind of thing. And supply chain, humanitarian logistics is a new area or an important area for all the organizations to work on. Empowering, protection, safeguard of the front line. That is one of the areas where I think we can all design our programs. Handholding the informal sector is another opportunity, because that's a sector which is which is worst hit. And if we can design programs to help them, that will be a new opportunity for us. And community awareness building. I did a quick survey that in urban area, this community awareness to become COVID safe is much greater. But the rural areas is just opposite. Hardly anybody is using a mask. Hardly anybody is using the social distancing. Hardly anybody is using hand washing. Hardly anybody is using the sanitization. So all these things, how we can, so this can be done by the NGOs best. Then promoting virtual care. That's healthcare is not only going to the hospital. There are many things, many non-clinical aspects can be handled. Like we are experimenting with creating a model quarantine center at a community level by a NGO and joining hands with some hospital NGOs and all that. It's happening, and we'll be very soon. We'll be sharing some the case study and experiences. And the last but not the least, access to entitlement. You must have seen that every day, every moment, the new the entitlement schemes are getting announced by the government. So how people will know it and how people will be able to avail it, that's important. Here is an opportunity for civil society to get in. So these are some of my quick thoughts. The few are there, but we'll talk about it later when the relevant topic comes. Thank you, Vikrant.
I think thanks for, that's been a very elaborate sharing, sir. I think your last point, which you're saying about access to entitlements, maybe I think I'll take the discussion, move forward more toward the social protection schemes of the government of India. And maybe I'll also move to Prema, who comes from a lot of grassroots experience for working with the women's organizations and all. So, Prema, from your perspective, where do you see that the impact of COVID on some of the development goals, and if you can share more specifically with reference to poverty, livelihoods, health and nutrition, more focusing on women and children specifics in India. Over to you, Prema.
Thanks, Vikrant, for this opportunity. And I would say that I'm speaking from the experience of our COVID relief program across Maharashtra, Bihar, and Kerala. We reached out to over 15,000 families, but the main impact that we are seeing going forward, first it was food security, and of course the lack of employment, rural employment, and lack of even resources to restart farming where I come from. So specifically we are talking about zones which are climate hit. So there is a compounded crisis, both to ensure water security, now that there's an increased need for hand washing, hygiene, water and sanitation. But I would like to really bring back the focus that while there is a lot of talk about reskilling, I would say the emphasis is to create more and more job creators, even in the rural. And therefore, we have to take into account that poverty has increased a lot. And so there are 44 million new poor in terms of the migrants who have returned. So we are talking about nearly 100 million people. And from that, I think we see strongly that women among the poor are very much affected. They are not able to access the social protection programs, especially among the vulnerable groups, scheduled castes and so on, and also the widows. So, but our last 2 months, 2.5 months experience shows that once you invest in agriculture as a way of ending poverty, I would strongly advocate that all of us working in the sector advocate with the NITI Aayog to invest in agriculture to end poverty. This will provide not only the farmers' incomes, but also a lot of agri-allied business and employment for the labor who have returned. So skilling alone is not enough. We need to invest in the enterprise strategy. So on one hand, it is through NREGA that we get job cards, but also we've noticed that a lot of people need the access to the PDS. So we are talking about access to PDS, access to the ICDS take-home rations, and the access to, of course, healthcare. And our efforts in more than 600 villages have shown a success that we had women leaders as a task force in every village, interacting closely with the Gram Panchayat. And a couple of things were shown that we need to institutionalize and invest in women's capacity. It's not, is it audible, Vikram?
Yes, Prema, please go ahead.
Yeah, because I got a message. No, so the concrete suggestion is that we need to invest in agriculture, we need to invest in women's leadership and capacity building and mentoring. so that they can be the bridging force between communities at the last mile and the Gram Panchayats. Also, as as Professor Christie said earlier, we also expect that there will be a lot of effect on women and children in terms of withdrawal of health services and also the expected dropout of children from the schools and child labor. So these are very sensitive issues going forward, which women's groups and developing women's leadership at the local level, looking at project support units in very key departments, social welfare, women and child welfare, and also agriculture, to see that both representatives from NGOs and also community-based groups are there in these project support units. I'll stop here, Vikram, and further we can continue.
Sure. Thank you so much, Prema. And I think it's picking up some of the research which started coming out. Is I think it's coming out that COVID itself is going to have an impact on 135 million jobs and leaving around more than 150 million people, putting them back into poverty. So in this light of this, I think most of the poverty alleviation programs, the livelihood programs like NREGA and others, even in their engagement is appears to be over these months greatly impacted. And I think I'll set the context and more move towards Mr. Matthew Cherin, who has a lot of experience about these social protection schemes over here. So, Mr. Cherin, how do you see that the impact of COVID in some of the flagship and social protection schemes of Government of India, and maybe more specifically, I think is now looking at the elderly population and maybe the people with disability, women livelihoods, and NREGA, other such programs. Over to you, Mr. Cherin. Is Mr. Matthew Cherin, sir, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Vikrant, for involving me in this conversation on what is the impact of COVID on programming, etc. I was releasing my book last week, which I wrote on aging and poverty, and I had included a special chapter on pandemics and emergencies. So this was the first emergency where we did not loss of communication or loss of electricity. Because in all my 40 years of work on the ground on disasters, these were two things which were missing in all disasters. But this corona pandemic had none of this. But at the same time, we had a greatest impact on the poor was experienced here. So coming to elderly and aging populations, according to Government of India, 53.3 million are below the poverty line, who deserve pension under the National Social Program, where the Indira Gandhi old age pension gives a 200 rupee pension to most elderly, and also to elderly widows. And elderly widows are about 22 million widows. But what happened in this pandemic is more people joined the bands of the poor. Those who had even a minimum livelihood lost their work, and from the Prime Minister to everybody said, you elderly are at risk, stay indoors. How do you stay indoors and make your food or get your ration or do whatever you want? So the staying indoors was the biggest curse of the corona pandemic. And as a result, it has put more than 90 million elderly under isolation and loneliness with no support from the young people. And as you know that the migrants are all sitting in their cities, their children and their, you can say even their other siblings are caught up in the cities under lockdown. I would say this has been the biggest curse of the government by imposing such a lockdown on the elderly. And as I speak at this moment, the lockdown on elderly still continues. So from a social protection point of view, and Prushti had raised about social development goals, the very first one on eradication of poverty in all forms everywhere. What has happened is it has not only increased the poverty, but it has increased the poverty to such a level, touch, in my opinion, greater than about 175 million in the country. And this is a rough estimate by what the ground. It has put people who are below the poverty line also into greater misery. So pension is not working. There is another scheme of the government which is the right to food. And under the National Food Security of India, everybody in India needs to get food. And barring the state of Orissa, the implementation of the NFSA during the corona pandemic was worst in other states, and many people did get their ration. And even the migrants who were in Delhi did not get any ration. And HelpAge plus other organizations had to get into serving them cooked food and dry rations to simply eat. So this was the effect of the pandemic. I would say the government may have announced various schemes, but it has failed completely in implementation of the last mile connectivity of providing rations or providing pensions. So this has been a great impact. Then, of course, on terms of programming, in all our old age homes, we are still under lockdown, and all of them are actually not even allowed to, because the district administration in most places have locked them in and said elderly should not come out. So old age homes, of course, we have stocked ration, we have stocked other provisions, etc., but they're not allowed to. So we have actually been put into jail by the corona pandemic and the government's faulty implementation of whatever lockdown procedures have been going. The third is the medical risk. We had a program called the National Program for Healthcare of the Elderly, which was to provide 10 beds in every district hospital of the country. And these 10 beds had to come up in 717 districts of the country. The scheme was announced in 2008, and till date, only 196 districts have got even these 10 beds. So if elderly get affected by COVID, they will neither be treated by their immediate neighbors because they are scared of touching the elderly, assuming that their COVID is going to happen, and plus the district hospitals do not have the facility. So we have found that all over India, this has been the curse on the elderly by not providing geriatric care at the basic ground level. So district after district, you will find no facilities for elderly at district hospital level. And the primary health center, nothing much need to be written about that. Those are far worse than the district hospitals themselves. So this has been and how it has affected HelpAge, I would say the funding to the social sector has dropped drastically because we are not a grant dependent organization. We depend on philanthropic contribution and individual contribution. That has fallen drastically, and many people are only prepared to give money for COVID. Nobody is prepared to give money for existing programs and other programs, be it eye care or be it cancer care or be it other forms of programming which is required. So this crisis is going to affect the entire social sector, and of course my prediction is this will continue for a full year, and you may calculate this year as a 0 year. And okay, the third aspect which I want to highlight upon is the government, by bringing in the PM CARES fund, has actually started becoming a competitor to the funds coming to the NGO sector. So Prime Minister Modi has grabbed all the funds and has even ordered corporates who were donating funds under CSR to donate to the PM CARES fund. This has depleted our funds, and it is proved to be a big competitor to the NGO sector by creating this PM CARES fund. Plus, I would also say that the government also passed in two regulations simultaneously. One is on the renewal of Section 12A and ATG, and also under the CSR, they said trusts and societies cannot apply for CSR funding. So this has been a subject of lobbying from our side through WANI, other associations and networks. So the sector is being beaten on all counts by even the regulatory authorities. So the CSR funding, which was 18,000 crores, cannot be accessed by any of the NGOs who are now present even on the Zoom call unless they modify the law. So I would say we'll have to look at this very carefully. We are actually facing grave danger, and unless we try to lobby and move the changes, we are going to be in deeper trouble. I'm going to close with these remarks and allow other people to continue on this.
Yes, and thanks, Mr. Cherian. I think you not only delve deeper into the social protection issues related to the elderly and the others, but also took the discussion forward towards the availability of resources. And maybe I think I'll move forward towards Ms. Neelam from the Child Fund India. She also comes from the experience of working with the insurance and all. So, Neelam, from your perspective, how is the availability of resources looking now and in future, and how you see the insurance and microfinance, other options also coming in play for that? Over to you, Ms. Neelam.
Thank you, Vikrant. It's actually very hard to speak after Matthew does. He's the master and the guru and a very dear friend. So he's made a very good points. I mean, you know, I won't go into the problems that COVID has resulted us because everyone talks about it. I wanted to move on to what we can do. The problems that were pre-COVID have just been amplified, whether it is malnutrition or livelihood. Everything was there, it's just amplified. The government schemes like the Integrated Child Protection Scheme was very weak anyway. Now Anganwadis are closed. So children, their nutrition, their immunization, everything has come to a stop. Schools are closed. So it's just a question of we know how bad this is, but what can we do and how can we? And very recently, the Supreme Court and the Niti Aayog have on many occasions praised the work of NGOs that has been done over this COVID period. Child Fund alone has reached 300,000 children and families in the last few weeks. We have been on the ground even before lockdown started. So, you know, we haven't stopped our interventions. We're reaching out with whatever that was required, whether it was food or hygiene or whatever else. And of course, we want to do more. But like your question, where are the resources? Even though the sector is being praised for what it has done and complimented and supported the government efforts, the resources are almost impossible to touch. I mean, Matthew said it really well. Who's your competitor? You know, earlier we used to think NGOs, we compete, the pie is small, but we still get along. The government has to, and I think it owes it to the sector, to create a conducive environment for us to function and get us the resources. We do have to, for example, we have to update what we did on COVID every 2 weeks. But how much can you do without the resources coming to you? The corporates are holding on to their last penny. I mean, they haven't done well, but the CSR funds are for the last 3 years of profit. So they did well, but they're holding on to their monies. And they are also not sure where to put their money on, to where to invest, how much. The trust, the whole, it's the time today is almost like, as Sudarshan said, running after a DTC bus. And I feel it's like you're building the plane and flying it, and you don't have all the money and you're up in the air. So it's a really very dynamic situation. And I think money is hard, extremely hard. and the government, I think government owes it that it makes it easier for NGOs to operate and let us allow to have the resources from the corporates, from the multilateral agencies and their own government schemes. There is a lot of money with the government, whether it's PM CARE or CM Fund. I think they should open up their wallets and let the NGOs do the implementation, what we are best at. And we know our communities and we understand the needs. So I think it's a question is, how do we move forward? How do we collaborate better? We have to be very agile, and I'm very proud of my team who was perfect on the ground when the time was needed, and we still are. And we aim to reach, we work in 15 states, so we've been doing all the work that we do under COVID in all the states, all the communities, thousands of communities. So I think it is about, although you want to be positive because everything around you is so difficult, and you can't see the light at end of tunnel, but I think you want to be positive, and positivity with agility, and I think this is how we will pass through this phase. My colleagues earlier, whether Matthew, Sudarshan, they all talked about how do you get over this and how do you create business models and business continuity plans. That's what we are doing. But seriously, whether it's the new CSR law that is being proposed, which is quite ambiguous, but also makes it more difficult. You do question what is the future of NGOs if those kind of laws are passed, and so it is hard. But I suppose we shouldn't reinvent the wheel. Each one of us, you've got lots of NGOs as the participants here as well. We need to collaborate more. We need to raise our voice more and be able to do more sustainable work. It is hard, whether it's the NREGA or whatever it is. I mean, 10% of NREGA people who have the job cards are actually getting jobs. So enrolling more under NREGA, the migrant workers who've gone back, giving more people NREGA cards is not going to just generate jobs because you have a card. So where is there? I mean, there has to be a plan, and we are none of us, none of the NGOs that you can hear us today and are on the list are, can have the resources that the government does. So we need to collaborate more, and I think that is the only way to come through this. And of course, we'll have to find new ways of working. I don't think that is the problem. We have been very agile. So what is it? But then you just have to continue having people in the field and get the work done. And we are risking our lives by being in the field. So be that, because we get into the sector because we believe we want to make a difference. We want to give people the dignity. We want the well-being of the people, which is why we come into this sector. But then we shouldn't be on the other side of wanting to not having enough resources to do what we want to do. So I'll leave it here, but a lot of panelists have talked about the problems this has created, and that everybody knows. Let's talk about solutions here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Neelam. I think forward looking toward the solutions, and I think the ambiguity within the emerging in the CSR law and other regulations government is bringing in. I think we have with us Jayanti, who heads the United Way of Mumbai, and she works very closely with many CSRs. So over to you, Jayanti. What do you feel now? Looking at the availability of resources now and in future, how do you see the CSR? Many of them are contributed to PM cares, and perhaps not just this year, but the future years provisions also. That's what the PM cares has the options. So how do you see the resources available from various options? Over to you, Jayanti.
Firstly, I must say that whatever the speaker said before me was very true, and it really touches a chord, because as was very clear, we are in this sector for an objective, and when you find that you don't have enough funds to do it, or you're absolutely cutting corners, then it is a challenge. So I do understand that, and my my appreciation to everyone for still continuing with the work that everyone is doing. Now, coming to CSR funds, I mean, we deal a lot with corporates, and CSR funding is a major part of our funding channels. So if you look objectively at that, at the situation, now the pandemic basically has straddled two financial years. One was the last quarter of last year, when actually the funds had already come in. I mean, people had already got committed funds, and that money was already there with us. The second was the first quarter of this year. Now, normally in a regular year, in a good year, this is when the accounts are closed and the CSR money is still being sort of understood where it has to go, and those it's a lean period. But because the pandemic struck, everybody, all corporates put this on the fast track, and CSR money started to flow out right in quarter 1 itself. It's a good thing in a way, and that was a great opportunity to a lot of NGOs to try and reach out corporates to see whether the funds that they suddenly opened out, whether that was available to them or not. But the one thing was that all corporates basically wanted to give it only for immediate relief and directly for COVID-related work. So what happens to all the other work that is being done by, for example, the speakers before me, and that so much of impactful work, and that remains a question even now. So, as rightly said, CSR money, I would still say is probably available this year if we either relook at our programs, rethink our programs, position the element of COVID in it, probably that might make it amenable for them to consider CSR funding coming to other programs. But next year definitely is going to be a huge big if. It's not going to work at all. So I think it's very important for us all to relook at the way we are doing our programs and see whether we can be more realistic. There are some elements of our program probably which we will not be able to do going forward. It's a very hard call to take because we love our work so much. There are some things which probably will not attract funding at all. And do we take a call and either closing it or repositioning it in some way or putting it on the back burner for a while? And as Mr. Cherian so correctly said, the PM CARES unfortunately has become our biggest competitor. I mean, it's a fully tax deducted program, and it also qualifies for the 2% CSR, and more difficult for us in the sector than having to compete with the Prime Minister's funds, etc. So CSR, we will have to relook at the way we are doing even our CSR sourcing. And, we haven't even come to the phase when we are going to look at the redevelopment part, which is going to start now, when all the communities have to get back into reconstruction. And that again is going to require a huge amount of money. And where does that money come from? So for us to relook at all our programs and see whether we can reposition our work and see how we can make it aligned enough for the corporates to release whatever funds they have towards even the redevelopment part is something I feel we would have to do. But also asked about, what are the other funding options? I mean, what about retail? What about individual donations? So as happens in any disaster, individuals come forward and donate very generously because it has such an emotional pull. So we've been able to, like at United Way Mumbai, we've been able to generate quite a bit of individual donations because we work with corporates, and a lot of corporates wanted employee donation programs to be set up, and we did that. We could actually raise a lot of money. So maybe that's another way to actually raise funds too. See whether we can tap the Indian diaspora who actually would also want to play a role in doing something for the community which has been so badly affected. But if you're talking about public financing, I think that's a completely different ball game at the moment. I mean, institutional funders, where do they stand? We have no idea at all. As all the speakers said, where is the government? What is their direction for releasing funds? We have no idea. Do they have any clarity on, say, skilling or health, or how are we going to go towards that? We really don't have any clarity on that. So I think for as the time progresses, we might understand more about where we are headed. But till then, I think that is a big question. Over to you, Vikrant.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jayanti. I think very rightly. I think when the COVID came up, it was the month of March. Most of the finances profits for this year was already booked, and perhaps the CSR contribution from that is available. But the next year that's where the profits are falling for most corporates, and it's having a great impact onto it. And then on top of the regulatory impact and the competition from the PM CARES, it really puts up the picture ahead a bit different. And maybe in the business of supporting people, working for the people, we need to find different ways of working. But I think before going towards this different way of working again is PM CARES I think both Matthews and Jayanti and others have addressed the one of the new development we see. But there's also been lots of discussion and debate going on then how probably civil society can work with the PM cares or work around it. So I like Mr. Prusti. I think we are also running out of time. Can you be very objectively, just few suggestions, in brief, what do you see the probable options of NGOs working with the PM cares and what measure you suggest for that? Over to you, Mr. Prusti.
Yeah, it is a very well expected or a desirable thing, because PM Care is a fund dedicated for COVID response, and if government well recognizes, Prime Minister himself recognizes the contribution made by the NGOs, and the Prime Minister very well knows that his conditionalities for contribution to PM Care has deprived the NGOs of a big chunk of money. So that means PM Care has taken out the share of money that was supposed to have come to the NGOs. And also another thing, that the government has also allowed the corporates to give advance funding. That means they can keep the future year accounting, they can incorporate and all that. So that means we are going to get starved of fund even next year. So that's going to happen. But PM Care, since it is a funding window, I think we should very strongly and very effectively lobby and negotiate that you have taken the fund, it's okay, but at the same time you allow the NGOs to access this fund. You should create a window within the PM Care fund. How they can and what kind of program the NGOs can do. NGOs have got tremendous capacity. They have demonstrated various work, so they can access this fund. Like government allows NGOs partnership, so PM Cares must allow NGO accessing the PM Care fund also. That is my submission, but that needs a tremendous amount of lobbying and creating a civil society pressure on the system. But one more point I want to bring, Brikant and others, that the government of late has continuously created non-government organization within the government. What I mean by that you would have known that all SDMS, disaster management authorities, have been registered as under the Society Act, and they are all now become entitled to get all CSR fund. And there are several within the government system. There are several independent, autonomous, non-profit kind of body. They're just legal entities, but they are government entities, and those now they become eligible for getting CSR fund. So that means you have creating NGOs within the government. NGO means non-government organization. Why should you create a non-government organization within the government organization? That's my biggest concern. And I'm surprised that people have not gone to the court as yet.
Yeah, I think definitely the issue and area of where perhaps we all need to come together and collective and maybe lobby. Mr. Matthew, do you also want to say something more, that how can probably NGOs work with the PM Cares? Do you see the possibilities?
No, I was listening to my dear friend Prusti, and actually to test the waters, I had sent an application to the PM Cares Fund telling that you have collected money, now why don't you give us a donation for our projects? And
that's interesting, yeah.
And quickly came the reply that this is not meant for you. So, so it may require lobbying, and so currently it is not meant for the NGO sector. It is meant for apparently the government. And the second variation they did is in the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, they made a quick amendment, and CBDT made a quicker amendment to give them 100% tax relief. And as most people in the NGO sector know, from 2014, the 100% tax exemption has been removed for all the NGOs. And suddenly now, out of the blue, this favorite foundation gets everything from 100% to CSR allocation. Everything is going to that. So clever manipulation of the laws that are, and the only thing is the bureaucrats have bent backwards to accommodate the fund. Till date, there is no statement or RTI which says how is the funds been utilized, and I have still not come across even a one-page report on what has been collected, what has been utilized, etc. So is the transparency. So of course we have fought for transparency in the NGO sector for many years, and this is the state of the government organized NGO, GONGO as we call it. So this is, I'm maybe I may be sounding cynical, but that is the state of the nation. Yeah.
Yeah, you are correct.
No, I think it's absolutely on the point. I heard probably Neelam. Do you want to say something?
Oh, Prema here.
Sorry, Prema, please. Yes, Prema, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Vikram. I know we'll be soon wrapping up this session, but I would say that let's look forward, and I would stress that it's very clear that as a sector we need leadership, and we need a voice to lobby with the NITI Aayog, and I hope SPEAR and other such organizations will look at these opportunities, because it's very clear that we need to suggest pathways where we would be overcoming not just the crisis related problems, but we I think could make a clear case that we don't want poverty to deepen even more, and therefore ending poverty for us in the rural framework is clearly increasing the investment in agriculture, increasing the investment in looking at how more enterprises can create jobs in the rural, and that includes, and for those who don't fall in the safety net, how can we look at how entitlements and all these COVID relief programs, recovery programs, how can they actually reach the last mile? So I would say that even looking at NGOs, we need to look at how we can work more actively with the panchayats and with the organized women's groups. This is very clear, and also with the government to see that frontline workers, we are aligned with the frontline workers, because going forward, we need to really look at how the rural areas can be protected from the spread of infection. So there are points which are related to COVID, but there are also points related to the access to services and entitlements, social protection especially, but also health and nutrition services. So I would say the key is closing the gap at the last mile, and also getting very real beyond the calls in terms of a collaborative and a strong sector. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Prema. I think one of the way what we are finding it in all the discussion moving forward is that we need to collaborate more, perhaps, and it's a collaboration with the government, with the people, among the NGOs, among other actors, the CSR, others more. So maybe, and we are absolutely running out of time, and if I may borrow maybe a few more minutes, we may have to take your participant questions also. But before that, maybe one top line, one point, single, I think very brief, one top point recommendation from each one of you for a collaboration. So maybe James sir, will you like to make it first?
But I will just take 1 minute, not more than that, on the issue of resource mobilization. I mean, resource. What Matthew has said is, it's a fact. How two things are there that the flexible resources are finishing out, and we are coming to CSR also is a very challenging. Larger organizations can access CSR funds, but the smaller organizations, which are very large in number and which are the bulwark and which are the backbone of this civil society, they are completely getting resourceless from all points of view. So it's getting very, very challenging. The biggest challenging we as civil society leaders or the larger organizations, lead organizations face is to how do we keep the civil society at the grassroots level surviving. And for that, what is the way, how do we build up their resource mobilization capacities? That's one thing. And second is that the time has now come when we have to focus on a community level or a village level, local resource mobilization, strong principles and practices. And there are many examples which have come up where together and they are fighting and continuing struggles, and that is the model, dual model we will have to need to persist, because larger agencies can still survive, but the most of the smaller organizations and the people's movements and all have to also be supported in terms of resources, and within the country, local and especially local resources are very, very important to be utilized in terms of cash or in terms of kind. This is an area which will protect the future of the civil society in India. Otherwise, only 10 or 15, 20 large organizations like CASA and all will be remaining, and after 5 years, others would probably have very limited space to operate upon.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing out and highlighting that, Jayant, towards the end. Maybe I think it's we are really running out of time. So very quick, brief points only. So, Mr. Sudarshan, do you want to say one top recommendation in brief?
Yeah, I think for long we have been always responding to a given situation or given conditions. So I feel we are constantly in the mindset of being prisoners of our own circumstances rather than leading with a very strategic thing. So CSR bill came, CSR funds came, and we have all been, working around it as to, more focusing on sometimes complaining that we are not getting enough or we should get more. I think we should be reaching out strategically, build a platform of our own to say CSR law by itself does not change anything. We need to engage both with government and with the corporate CSR to give them a better brief of how CSR investments could be made. It's with that knowledge a certain shift will come. Otherwise, in absence of information, knowledge, and in active advocacy, it will always remain as a knee-jerk action that, which funding, when, how to survive and how to tide over. And I think we should also brainstorm in perhaps looking at a whole new genre or approach of fundraising where, I'm just speaking ideally, not let us say this thing. So it's an aspirational goal where we take the context of fundraising to individual citizens invested in the development of country and actually be selective even in taking CSR funds. If only we could turn the whole situation around. Till we survive at the mercy of absolute funding, and only that we'll remain captive to the conditions under which that funding will take place. And I think that struggle shall continue if we look at short-term approaches.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sudarshan. Maybe Neelam, 1 point from you.
Thank you, Vikrant. I think my point would be to collaborate more. And, we have been talking about pooling funds on thematic pillars, and we've been talking about pooling funds for organizations who work in similar areas, similar stakeholders, but also on themes. And I think, for example, Jayanti with United Way, she would understand this better in sense of saying that she has a pool of corporates and who are they focusing on? What's the thematic focus? We have to move also beyond COVID. COVID can be one part of it, but our regular programming must continue. that, I mean, we are built on strong programs. My organization will celebrate 70 years next year. We have very strong program models and themes and outcomes that we want to achieve. So while COVID has changed the way we do things and how we will do it, but the regular programming must continue. So my only submission would be for us to look at how do we pool funds over thematic issues, and how do we therefore look at the best way forward to collaborate and not reinvent, but try and reach out to the largest number of people we can. Less money, better and greater impact.
Great. Thank you so much. I think, yeah, pool funds and other new ways of working ahead. Jayanti, maybe one point from your side?
So
You're telling me?
yeah, I can.
Please.
Yeah, so I'd actually like to speak more in a lighter vein. If you remember, Winston Churchill had once said that never let a good crisis go to waste. So I would like us to take this opportunity to create a realistic blueprint for emerging stronger from the crisis. It's not an easy task, I do understand, but I think this is probably an opportunity to relook at a lot of ways in which we've been doing business. So planning our cash flows, developing a very robust contingency plan, which has to be merged into every program of ours, because this pandemic has been a lesson for all of us that you have to have a contingency plan. A plan B has to be there in your work. And also a great opportunity to strengthen and consolidate relationships and keep track of new opportunities for partnering, new opportunities for fundraising, and consolidating all our relationships.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Jayanti. And I think we are grossly over time, and but maybe still can take a couple of questions from the participants. If there are any raised hands, we can take that directly. Any questions from participants?
I don't think so. But
Also,
you can raise your hand if you want to ask any question.
Okay, there have been few in the chat box. Maybe I'll pick up at least one of that.
I'm in a webinar. Can I call you? Oh, can I call you?
Yeah, there is one hand from Mr. Rohit.
I'll just call you in a few minutes.
I'm muting you. Please accept it, and you can ask your question, Mr. Rohit.
Mr.
Yeah, you can
Rohit,
ask.
so please ask your question. Hello. Am I audible?
Yeah, Navila, please, I'm there.
Okay, I think he's not asking Vikrant. We should move ahead. He's already unmuted, but I don't see him
Okay,
speaking.
thank you. Thank you, Navila.
Vikrant, just one point.
Yeah, Prema.
I would end on the note that several speakers have said this, but I think I would really the problem looks very huge and the challenges are many. But I would end by saying that we, as NGOs, we need to really look at local action and adaptability of communities very, very seriously in our upcoming strategy and blueprint, as Jayanti said. Looking at community groups and organized groups as a resource, mobilize resources from there so that local action becomes much more self-reliant. And I'll just give an example that we had a campaign for dry ration food release, but the communities and particularly the women's groups raised much more money locally from the farmers and from the government, and they could cater to nearly 15,000 families. Similarly, on the migrant crisis, we have a collaborative unit in Maharashtra called the Jeevan Rath. 50 organizations and we've reached out to more than 200,000 migrants in the last few weeks. It's been tremendous.
Yes,
I think these examples
yes,
show
Prema.
up
I think
here.
yes, I think the very important point about more collaborations as coming from everybody, but more at the local level, also involving community in these collaborations. And I think what we hear is maybe working around with the government also. So something like public-private partnership, public-private people's partnership. I think having community toward the center of it. We discussed a range of issues within the NGO programming. What are the challenges? What solutions which have been tried, and what we learned out of it? Moving forward, how is it impacting on the resources, and what we all need to do about it? I think it's been a very interesting discussion. A lot of takeaways for us. Not enough time to discuss it entirely. Perhaps I think we'll like to flag it once again with the other set of leader and other set of questions probably. Thanks. My moment to thanks everybody. Thanks specifically all the participants who've been there listening, as well as for all the good work they have been doing on the front line of the actions in this time of crisis. My opportunity to thank all the panelists, Mr. Jayant, Mr. Metucherian, Mr. Prusti, Prema, Ms. Neelam, and Ms. Jayanti. Thanks, Mr. Sudarshan. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for taking out your time. My thanks to our supporters as well as my team, Nivila, Weber, and others who have been supporting to make it happen. So with this, I hand it back to Nivila for final closure and logistics announcement. Over to you, Nivila.
Sure. Thank you, Vikrant. I would just like to announce that all the participants who are here, they can receive their participation certificate after 24 hours by visiting our website, which is www.spearindiacovid19academy.org. You can visit this website at 24 hours. Also, tomorrow we have a very technical session, which is self-care, health, and infection prevention for the people with disabilities during COVID-19. And it is from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Looking forward to participation there as well. If we haven't been able to answer any queries because we're running short of time, I would request all the participants to write to us at covid19academy@spearindia.org.in, and we'll try to respond to all your queries. Also with this, I would like to thank all our panelists. Thank you, Vikrant, and thank you everyone. Thank you all the participants for attending this session. Thank you all and have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.